The restaurant was alive with the usual evening chaos, but tonight felt different. The air smelled of fried food, coffee, and the faint scent of cleaning supplies. The lights hung low, giving the place a warm glow. But it did little to calm the nervous energy buzzing in the corners of the room. The waitress moved quickly between tables, balancing plates of food and drinks, apologizing for small delays, and always keeping a polite smile on her face. Her uniform was slightly wrinkled, her hair tied back neatly, and her shoes clicked against the tile floor with every step. She had been working here for several months, and though she enjoyed meeting different people, some nights tested her patience and endurance more than others. It had been a long day. The lunch rush was unforgiving, and the staff barely had time to breathe before the dinner crowd arrived. Now, as the evening wore on, she found herself answering questions that seemed endless, taking orders that were complicated, and trying to calm a few impatient guests who tapped their fingers on the table or muttered under their breath. One of the regulars was particularly loud tonight, talking about how nothing compared to the service in the fancy restaurants across town. The waitress smiled politely and nodded, knowing that arguing would only make things worse. She had learned early that the best way to handle complaints was with quiet patience. Near the far corner of the restaurant, an old piano rested against the wall. It was dark and polished, showing signs of age and use. Most people ignored it, assuming it was part of the decor. Only a few noticed it occasionally, like a background element in a scene they didn't care to watch. Tonight, piano seemed to draw attention for a reason the waitress could not yet understand. A group of people had gathered near the piano, chatting and laughing loudly. They were dressed in business casual attire, clearly enjoying an evening out. One of them leaned toward the waitress as she passed by with a tray of drinks and asked if anyone could play the piano. The question seemed casual, almost a joke, but the way it was said carried a hint of challenge. Her heart skipped a beat. She had played piano for years in her youth, but she had stopped when life became busy and responsibilities piled up. Music was no longer part of her daily life, yet the thought of sitting at that piano suddenly filled her with both fear and curiosity. She paused at the end of a table, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The manager was nearby, overseeing the evening, and he had a reputation for being strict. He noticed the glance from the group and frowned. The waitress felt a wave of panic, imagining what he would say if she attempted to play. She had learned to follow the rules and avoid drawing too much attention to herself, especially in moments when failure might be humiliating. Still, there was a small voice inside her that whispered, "What if you tried? What if you just played one song?" The restaurant's atmosphere was tense, but in a quiet way. Waiters moved around with trays held high, silverware clinked, chairs scraped against the floor. Conversations blended into a constant hum. The group near the piano had become more animated, joking about the idea of a staff member actually entertaining them. One of them clapped his hands lightly and said, "Come on, someone show us what you've got. Don't just serve food, show some talent." A few others laughed, their eyes scanning the room, as if daring someone to step forward. The waitress felt every eye in the room, or at least it seemed that way. She wasn't sure if it was courage or foolishness that made her take a step toward the piano. Her hands were slightly sweaty, and her heart pounded loudly in her chest. She walked past the tables carefully, feeling the weight of expectation, both real and imagined. The guests at nearby tables noticed her movement and began to whisper. Curious about what was about to happen, she reached the piano and stood there for a moment, looking at the keys. They were worn and shiny in the spots where fingers had pressed down countless times over the years. She remembered her first piano lessons, how her fingers had stumbled over scales, how her teacher had encouraged her to practice daily, and how she had once dreamed of playing in front of an audience, performing songs that moved people. That dream had faded with time, replaced by the need to work, pay bills, and survive in a busy world. Her hands hovered above the keys, and she could feel the tension in her shoulders. The manager approached, his expression stern. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly, not wanting to disturb other customers, but enough to make her flinch. She took a deep breath and said softly, "I can play, just a little." He raised an eyebrow, skeptical, and muttered something under his breath, but he didn't stop her. Perhaps he trusted her judgment, or perhaps he was too busy to intervene further. Either way, she sat down on the piano bench, adjusting her posture and taking another slow breath. The room seemed to change as she prepared to play. The noise of the restaurant faded slightly in her mind, replaced by memories of music. She remembered the first time she had played in front of anyone, the nervousness that had filled her stomach, and the pride she had felt when people clapped. She let her fingers touch the keys gently, testing the feel of them, connecting with the instrument that had once been a companion in her life. A hush began to spread through the restaurant. Some guests stopped talking, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. The group near the piano leaned forward, their expressions a mix of amusement and curiosity. The waitress felt the pressure building, but instead of retreating, she focused on the simple act of pressing the keys. A soft note rang out, and then another. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The melody began to take shape slowly, cautiously, like a river finding its way through rocks and soil. The sound was gentle, almost hesitant at first. But there was something pure about it. As she played, the waitress began to feel a connection she hadn't experienced in years. The music flowed naturally, her fingers remembering patterns long forgotten. She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to be immersed in the sound, letting go of fear and doubt. The room seemed to hold its breath, the clatter of dishes and chatter of conversation fading into the background. Only the piano and her fingers mattered now. Some guests whispered to each other, surprised by the talent emerging from someone they had just seen serve them food. The manager watched silently, his skepticism slowly giving way to awe. The waitress continued, gaining confidence with each note. She realized that the pressure she had felt moments ago was transforming into energy she could channel into her playing. The old piano, once just an object in the corner, had become a bridge to a part of herself she thought she had lost. The music began to change the atmosphere of the restaurant. Guests at nearby tables leaned closer, curious about the melody. Waiters paused briefly, trays in hand, captivated by the unexpected performance. Even the regulars, who were usually critical and demanding, seemed to soften, their expressions turning from boredom or impatience to interest. The sound of the piano was no longer just background noise. It was commanding attention, and everyone in the room felt it. She played on, letting her emotions guide her. The simple tune became more expressive, each note carrying a hint of her story, her struggles, her dreams, and the resilience that had kept her going. She felt a strange sense of liberation, as if the music itself was lifting her beyond the worries of the day. For a moment, she was no longer a waitress under pressure. She was a musician, sharing a piece of herself with the world, as the last notes of the melody lingered in the air. The room remained quiet for a heartbeat longer than expected. Then, a few guests started to clap, softly at first, and gradually the applause grew louder. Some guests who had been skeptical looked at her with new respect, their faces reflecting surprise and admiration. The manager, too, finally allowed a small smile to break through his normally serious expression. The waitress rose from the piano bench feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. She had faced the pressure, embraced it, and turned it into something beautiful. As she returned to her duties, the atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted. The guests were lighter, happier, and more engaged. Some even approached her to compliment her playing, asking how long she had been practicing, and marveling at the emotion she had conveyed through music. The evening had begun as another stressful shift, but it had transformed into an unforgettable experience, not just for the guests, but for her as well. She realized that even in the most ordinary moments, extraordinary things could happen if one had the courage to step forward and embrace the unexpected. After the applause faded and the restaurant returned to its normal hum, the waitress quietly walked back to her station. Her heart still raced, and her hands shook slightly from the adrenaline of playing in front of the crowd. She tried to focus on clearing tables and taking new orders, but her mind kept replaying the moment at the piano. It was strange how one short performance could awaken memories she had tucked away for so long. She had loved music more than anything once, but life had pushed her in a different direction. Money worries, family responsibilities, and the need to keep a steady job had forced her to put her piano dreams aside. Now, in the middle of a busy restaurant, that old passion had come rushing back, as if it had been waiting for the right moment to remind her it never left. She glanced at the piano from across the room. Its polished surface reflected the warm lights above. She could almost see the shadows of the music she had just played lingering in the air. Customers at nearby tables continued to talk about her performance, quietly praising her skill and the emotion behind it. A few brave ones even asked if she would play again sometime. The thought made her smile, but also stirred a strange anxiety. She was used to being behind the scenes, unnoticed, serving food, making small talk, and keeping the peace. Being the center of attention, even briefly, was uncomfortable. Though secretly exciting, the manager walked up to her quietly, trying not to interrupt the flow of the restaurant. He looked at her with a mix of curiosity and surprise. "I didn't expect that," he said softly. She felt a rush of relief, mixed with embarrassment. I used to play a lot," she replied, her voice low. He nodded, almost as if he was processing this new information. She had never told anyone at work about her past with music. To most, she was just a hard-working waitress who knew how to keep the floor running smoothly. Now, a part of her that had been hidden was suddenly on display. And it was both thrilling and frightening. As the evening went on, she noticed the way people looked at her differently. It wasn't just admiration. There was curiosity, intrigue, and a hint of expectation. Some regulars who had been critical before now seemed more friendly, their sharp words softened by the surprise of seeing her talent. A few guests who had been seated near the piano whispered about her skill, clearly impressed that a waitress could play so beautifully. It was a small moment, but it made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt for years. Her thoughts drifted back to her childhood, to the small living room where her first piano sat. She remembered sitting for hours, learning scales and simple songs, practicing until her fingers ached, and the thrill of mastering a piece and performing it for her family. Her parents had always supported her, encouraging her to dream big. But life had a way of steering her dreams in unexpected directions. After her parents passed away, responsibilities fell on her shoulders. Bills, rent, and the need to keep a steady income became her priority, and music quietly faded into the background. It had always been a part of her, though, tucked away like a secret treasure, waiting for the day she could rediscover it as she moved through her shift. She realized that the piano performance had stirred more than just the interest of the guests. It had stirred something within herself, a reminder that she was more than just a waitress, a lot more than someone who served meals and managed tables. She was capable of creating beauty, of moving people, of sharing something deeply personal through her music. The realization was both comforting and overwhelming. During a brief lull in the restaurant, she took a moment to look around. The piano was quiet now, almost ordinary again, but she felt a connection to it she couldn't ignore. It was more than a piece of furniture. It was a bridge back to herself, to a part of her identity that had been dormant. She wondered what it would be like to play there again, to share music not just as a private escape, but as a way to touch others. The idea terrified her and excited her in equal measure. The group who had challenged someone to play earlier was still at the restaurant, finishing their meals and laughing among themselves. Occasionally, they looked toward the piano and whispered, clearly remembering the performance. The waitress caught one of their glances and offered a shy smile. One of the guests leaned over and said, "You really have a gift. I didn't expect that at all." Her cheeks warmed at the compliment, and for a moment, she felt a mix of pride and disbelief. No one had seen this side of her in years, and the validation, though small, was meaningful. As the night progressed, she continued her duties, but her mind kept drifting. Every order, every interaction reminded her that she had another life tucked beneath the surface, one filled with music and expression. She thought about the possibilities, about the small choices she could make to reconnect with that part of herself. Perhaps she could start playing again, even if just for herself at first. The memory of the applause and the surprise on the guests' faces made the idea feel attainable. Even in the midst of a busy, ordinary job, she thought about the people who had inspired her in her past. Her first music teacher who had pushed her to practice, the family members who had cheered her on, and the friends who had always believed in her talent. They were gone now, but their influence lingered, guiding her hands and her heart. Music had once been a source of joy and comfort, a way to express what words could not. That joy was still there, buried under layers of responsibility and routine. But it had resurfaced tonight, reminding her of what she had almost forgotten as the restaurant began to empty. She finally had a few minutes to herself. She returned to the piano, her fingers lightly brushing the keys without playing a full note. The familiar texture under her fingers felt grounding, like reconnecting with an old friend. She thought about the night's performance, about how quickly fear had transformed into focus, and how the room had responded. It was a lesson she hadn't expected to learn in the middle of her shift. Sometimes pressure could reveal strength. And stepping into the unknown could open doors to parts of herself she had thought were gone forever. She sat there quietly, letting the memories wash over her. The music was still alive inside her, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to consider what it might mean to embrace it again. The restaurant's lights glowed warmly around her, and she felt a small spark of hope flicker within. It was not a solution to her problems or a complete transformation of her life, but it was a starter reminder that even in the most ordinary places, extraordinary moments could happen, and they could change the way she saw herself and the world around her. The following evening, the restaurant was again bustling with activity. The same tables were filled with familiar faces and new guests, laughter and conversation mingling with the clinking of dishes and silverware. The waitress arrived early for her shift, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Last night's performance still lingered in her mind, replaying like a vivid memory she couldn't shake. She knew that tonight might bring new challenges, but it also carried a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in years. She quickly slipped into her routine, taking orders, delivering drinks, and offering polite smiles to guests. Everything seemed ordinary on the surface, yet beneath it, a tension hummed through her. She found herself stealing glances at the piano, imagining the sound of the keys under her fingers, the way the music could fill the room and capture the attention of everyone present. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind wandered to the idea of playing again, of seeing how it felt to let the music flow freely once more. A few guests arrived early, taking their seats near the piano. They had heard about her performance from the night before and seemed curious to see if she would play again. The waitress noticed their eyes lingering on her as she moved through the restaurant. There was a mixture of expectation and anticipation in their gaze, and it made her pulse quicken. She reminded herself to stay calm, to not let the pressure overwhelm her. Last night had been a success, but tonight would be different. She had to find a balance between her work and the urge to express herself through music. As the evening wore on, the restaurant grew busier. Orders came in faster, and the kitchen staff worked with relentless energy to keep up. The waitress moved between tables with practiced efficiency, balancing trays and navigating crowded aisles. Her thoughts, however, kept drifting back to the piano. She thought about the song she had played yesterday, about the way her fingers had found their way across the keys despite her nerves. The memory was comforting, reminding her that she was capable of more than she often gave herself credit for. During a brief lull, she found herself standing near the piano once again. She lightly touched the keys, feeling the familiar smoothness beneath her fingers. The music seemed to awaken something inside her, a combination of memory and longing. She thought about her past lessons, the hours spent practicing scales and learning songs, the small victories that had once brought her so much joy. The piano had always been a source of comfort and expression, and now it called to her in a way she could no longer ignore. A young couple seated nearby leaned forward, whispering to each other about the piano and her talent. The waitress smiled quietly, feeling a mixture of pride and anxiety. She had never imagined that her playing could captivate an audience so easily. But here she was, at the edge of stepping back into a world she had once loved. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she did not need to perform perfectly. The goal was not to impress anyone, but to reconnect with a part of herself she had neglected for too long. Slowly, she sat down on the piano bench, adjusting her posture and placing her hands on the keys. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she was ready to let the music flow. But then, as she pressed the first note, a familiar feeling spread through her. The sound resonated in the room, drawing attention without any effort. The guests nearby fell silent, sensing the beginning of something special. The waitress closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the music to guide her. She let her fingers move naturally, remembering the rhythms and melodies that had once been second nature. As she played, the room seemed to transform. The usual background noise of the restaurant faded, replaced by the clarity and emotion of the piano. Each note carried a story, a fragment of her experiences, her dreams, and her resilience. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the responsibilities that had pulled her away from her passion, and the moments of doubt she had overcome. All of that poured into the music, giving it depth and sincerity that could not be faked. The guests listened intently, some leaning forward in their seats, others closing their eyes to fully absorb the sound. Conversations stopped, and the energy in the room shifted. The waitress felt a sense of freedom she had not felt in years, a connection to herself and to the people around her. Music had always been her voice when words failed, and now it spoke for her once again. Each chord, each melody seemed to release a part of her that had been confined by routine and expectation. She noticed the manager watching from across the room. His expression had softened since last night, and he seemed genuinely impressed. For a moment their eyes met, and she felt a sense of validation and reassurance. She was not alone in this rediscovery of her talent. The staff, too, paused to watch, their usual busyness replaced by curiosity and admiration. It was a shared experience, a quiet acknowledgement that something extraordinary was unfolding amidst the ordinary rhythm of the restaurant. The performance continued, growing more confident and expressive with each passing moment. The music carried a sense of narrative, telling a story of hope, struggle, and triumph. The waitress felt her nerves transform into energy, fueling her playing rather than hindering it. She realized that the pressure she had feared was not an obstacle, but a catalyst. It pushed her to focus, to engage fully with her skill and her emotions, and to share them with the world around her. Guests who had been skeptical or indifferent were now captivated, their attention entirely on the music. Some whispered to each other in awe, others reached for their phones to capture a memory of the unexpected performance. The young couple smiled at each other, clearly moved by the emotion and skill they witnessed. The room, once filled with chatter and distraction, now held a collective focus, united by the simple yet powerful act of music. As the final notes of the song faded into the evening air, a moment of silence hung in the room. Then, gradually, applause began to build, growing louder and more enthusiastic. Guests rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes, others simply smiling in wonder. The waitress felt a surge of gratitude and humility, realizing that she had shared a part of herself that few had ever seen. The music had connected her to the world in a way that transcended her daily routine. And the response from the audience was a reminder of the impact one person could have when they embraced their true self. She rose from the piano bench, her hands still tingling from the energy of the performance. Guests approached her with kind words, praising her talent and expressing admiration for her courage. The manager nodded in approval, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine respect. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted, infused with a sense of wonder and appreciation that would linger long after the evening ended. Returning to her station, the waitress felt a renewed sense of purpose and possibility. She realized that the piano was not just an instrument, but a bridge to her identity, a way to express emotions and experiences that words alone could not convey. The performance had reminded her that even in the midst of ordinary life, extraordinary moments were possible, and that embracing her talent could open doors to new opportunities and experiences. Throughout the rest of the night, she carried herself with a quiet confidence. Her movements were deliberate, her interactions with guests more relaxed and genuine. She understood that the performance had not only touched the audience, but it also touched something deep within her, a reminder of who she was and who she could become. The piano would always be there waiting for her, a constant source of expression and connection. As the restaurant emptied and the evening drew to a close, the waitress lingered by the piano once more, lightly pressed the keys, feeling the familiar sensation of music flowing through her fingers. It was a gentle reminder that her journey was far from over, and that the power of music could guide her through challenges, inspire confidence, and bring beauty to the world around her. The night had been more than a performance. It had been A step toward reclaiming a part of herself that she had long forgotten. A step that would shape the path ahead and redefine what was possible in both her life and the lives of those who had witnessed her gift. The next night, the restaurant was even busier than usual. People had heard about the waitress's piano performance from the evening before. Curiosity had drawn many to see if she would play again. The air was filled with excitement, chatter, and the aroma of fresh meals being prepared. The waitress arrived early, her mind a mix of anticipation and nervous energy. She knew that tonight, more than ever, she would be under the gaze of people who expected something special. It was a feeling she had to learn to handle, a pressure she had never fully faced before. As she moved through her duties, serving drinks, taking orders, and answering questions, she felt the weight of the attention in the room. Guests glanced toward the piano every now and then, some whispering to each other about what might happen. The staff exchanged knowing looks. Their curiosity mingled with respect for the quiet talent they had seen emerge over the past 2 nights. The waitress tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept returning to the piano. She wondered what it would feel like to play once more, to let the music flow freely, and to see the audience react as they had before. During a rare moment of calm, she approached the piano. Her fingers brushed the keys lightly, feeling the smooth, familiar surface beneath them. Memories of her past came rushing back, are spent practicing, lessons learned, and small victories that had once filled her with pride. She remembered the joy of mastering a song and the thrill of performing for friends and family, the applause and smiles that made every struggle worth it. That part of herself, long buried under the responsibilities of daily life, felt alive. Again, calling her to take the risk and express it once more. The guests seated near the piano watched her closely, some with curiosity, others with expectation. The waitress took a deep breath, trying to calm the flutter in her chest. She reminded herself that this was not about perfection, but about sharing a piece of herself through music. Slowly, she sat down on the bench, adjusted her posture, and placed her hands on the keys. A hush fell over the restaurant, as if everyone sensed that something remarkable was about to unfold. She pressed the first key, a single note that resonated through the room. It was soft and tentative, yet it carried the promise of what was to come. With each subsequent note, she found her confidence growing. The music began to flow naturally, guided by memory and instinct, her fingers dancing across the keys with skill and grace. The room seemed to transform as the melody filled every corner, drawing the attention of guests and staff alike. Conversations stopped, forks paused midair, and even the kitchen staff seemed to listen through the walls, captivated by the unexpected performance. The waitress allowed herself to close her eyes, immersing herself fully in the music. She remembered the lessons of her youth, the encouragement from teachers, and the joy of playing for an audience that appreciated her talent. That joy, once buried beneath years of routine and responsibility, now surged through her, giving every note a depth of feeling that was impossible to ignore. The piano became an extension of herself, a voice through which she could communicate emotions. It's too complex for words. Guests who had arrived skeptical or indifferent were now completely absorbed. Some leaned forward in their chairs, eyes closed, letting the music wash over them. Others exchanged whispered comments, amazed that a waitress could play with such skill and emotion. The atmosphere was electric, filled with a collective sense of awe and admiration. It was as though the room itself had paused to witness something extraordinary, something that transcended the ordinary rhythm of a busy restaurant. As the song progressed, the waitress felt a strange mixture of calm and exhilaration. The pressure she had anticipated was no longer a burden. It was fuel, driving her focus and deepening the emotion in her playing. She realized that the audience was not there to judge her, but to experience the music, to connect with the story she was telling through each chord and melody. That realization allowed her to play with freedom and authenticity, each note carrying the essence of her journey, her struggles and her triumphs. The manager, standing near the back of the room, watched with a quiet smile. His earlier skepticism had given way to genuine admiration. He had seen staff members perform well in their roles, but he had never witnessed a moment like this, a person transforming a routine evening into something unforgettable through talent and heart. The staff, too, paused in their tasks, captivated by the performance and proud of the courage their colleague displayed, as the final notes of the piece lingered in the air. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Then, gradually, the room erupted into applause. Guests stood, clapped, and cheered, some wiping tears from their eyes, others simply smiling in wonder. The energy was electric, a wave of appreciation and respect washing over the waitress. She rose from the bench, feeling both humility and pride. The performance had been more than a display of skill. It had been a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of following one's passion. People approached her with kind words, offering compliments and asking questions about her music. The young couple who had arrived early were especially enthusiastic, expressing amazement that such talent could come from someone they had only known as a waitress. Their words of encouragement reinforced her sense of possibility and hope. She realized that her journey was not just about entertaining others, but about reclaiming a part of herself she had almost forgotten. Throughout the rest of the night, the atmosphere in the restaurant remained uplifted. Guests were in higher spirits, conversations were lighter, and the energy felt warmer and more connected. The performance had changed the mood of the evening, creating a shared experience that would be remembered by everyone present. The waitress continued her duties with a newfound confidence, aware that her abilities extended beyond the ordinary tasks of her job at the end of her shift. She lingered near the piano, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys. The instrument felt alive beneath her touch, a reminder that her music was always a part of her, waiting for the right moment to emerge. She thought about the future, about the possibility of continuing to play, to share her talent, and to embrace the joy that music brought to her life and to others. The performance had been a turning point, a moment when pressure became opportunity, fear became courage, and an ordinary evening was transformed into something extraordinary. She left the restaurant that night with a sense of fulfillment she had not felt in years. The piano, the audience, and the music had reminded her of who she was and what she was capable of. Even amidst the ordinary routines of life, moments of wonder and connection were possible. She had experienced one firsthand. The applause, the smiles, and the shared awe of the guests would stay with her, reinforcing the belief that embracing one's true self could lead to remarkable experiences. The piano was no longer just an object in the corner of the restaurant. It was a gateway to expression, connection, and the discovery of her own potential. The following week, the restaurant had returned to its normal rhythm, but the atmosphere carried a subtle shift. Guests still spoke of the piano performances, sharing their surprise and admiration with anyone who would listen. The waitress moved through the restaurant with a quiet confidence she had never felt before, balancing her duties with an ease that drew smiles from both customers and coworkers. Her shift was no longer just about serving food. It had become an opportunity to embrace her abilities and connect with people in a deeper way, even as she carried trays and answered questions. Her mind often wandered back to the piano. She thought about the power of music, about how it could change the energy of a room, calm nerves, and inspire awe. She remembered the nervousness she had felt the first time she played under pressure, and how that nervousness had transformed into focus and strength. It was a lesson she would carry with her beyond the restaurant, a reminder that fear often preceded growth and achievement. One evening, a local event organizer visited the restaurant. He had heard about her performance through word of mouth and wanted to meet the waitress personally. He explained that he was putting together a small community concert and thought her talent would be perfect for the occasion. The invitation both thrilled and frightened her. She had never performed outside the restaurant before, and the idea of a larger audience made her stomach twist with anxiety. Yet a spark of excitement burned within her, a reminder of why she had loved music in the first place. She spent the next few days practicing whenever she could. Late at night, after the restaurant closed, she would sit at the piano and let the melodies flow. Each practice session helped her build confidence, refine her technique, and remember the joy that music had once brought her. The piano was no longer just a corner decoration. It had become a partner in her journey, guiding her through fear, frustration, and self-doubt. She found herself smiling more, speaking more freely with coworkers, and engaging with guests in a way that felt genuine and relaxed. When the day of the community concert arrived, the waitress felt a mix of excitement and nerves she hadn't experienced in years. She arrived early, greeted the organizers, and took her place at the piano. The audience slowly filled the room, their chatter blending into a low hum of anticipation. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, and reminded herself that music had always been her voice, her way of expressing what words could not. The nerves remained, but they were now tempered by preparation and passion. As she began to play, the room fell silent. The melody flowed naturally, her fingers moving with confidence and precision. Each note carried a piece of her story, her struggles, her resilience, and the rediscovery of her own strength. The audience responded with awe, their attention completely captured by the music. Some leaned forward, eyes closed, absorbing every chord. Others whispered to each other, marveling at the unexpected talent before them. For the first time, she realized that her music had the power to touch hearts beyond the walls of the restaurant. The performance continued. Growing in depth and emotion with each passing moment, she let herself be fully present, forgetting about fear, expectation, or judgment. The piano became an extension of her soul, allowing her to share her experiences and emotions in a way that resonated with everyone listening. The audience was captivated, some wiping tears from their eyes, others simply smiling in appreciation. It was a moment of connection and understanding, shared experience that transcended words. As the final notes faded, the room erupted in applause. The energy was overwhelming, a mixture of admiration, gratitude, and inspiration. The organizers approached her, offering congratulations and asking if she would be interested in performing again at future events. She felt a mixture of pride and humility, recognizing that this opportunity was more than just recognition of her talent. It was an acknowledgement of her courage, dedication, and passion in the days that followed. Her life began to shift in small but meaningful ways. Guests at the restaurant asked when she would play again. Coworkers offered words of encouragement, and she found herself exploring opportunities to perform outside of work. The piano, once a hidden part of her life, had become a central part of her identity. Music was no longer a secret she kept for herself. It was a gift she could share with the world. The waitress continued to balance her job with her growing involvement in music. She discovered that embracing her talent did not take away from her responsibilities. Instead, it enhanced her confidence, focus, and sense of fulfillment. She became more present with guests, more patient with coworkers, and more attuned to her own emotions. Each performance, whether in the restaurant or at a community event, reminded her of the transformative power of following one's passion. Over time, she noticed subtle changes in the restaurant as well. The atmosphere became warmer and more inviting, the staff more supportive and cohesive. Guests returned not just for the food, but for the experience. Knowing that music could appear unexpectedly and elevate the evening, the piano became a symbol of possibility and inspiration, a reminder that ordinary places could host extraordinary moments when courage and talent met. The waitress also began to think about her future. She realized that music could be more than a pastime. It could be a path to personal growth, connection, and even new opportunities. She considered taking lessons to refine her skills further, exploring venues where she could perform, and sharing her journey with others who might be afraid to embrace their own talents. The experience had shown her that age, circumstance, and routine did not define what one could achieve. Passion and persistence did. Each night, after her shift ended and the restaurant grew quiet, she would sit at the piano and play for herself. These private moments were just as important as public performances, allowing her to reflect, relax, and reconnect with the part of her that had always loved music. She realized that life would always have challenges, but music had become a constant source of strength and joy, a reminder of her ability to create beauty and inspire others. The story of the waitress who played piano, under pressure, spread through the community, inspiring others to explore their own hidden talents. She became a quiet example of courage, showing that even in ordinary settings, extraordinary moments were possible. Her journey was not just about performing. It was about rediscovering herself, embracing her abilities, and understanding that following one's passion could transform life in ways beyond imagination. Years later, she would look back on that first night at the restaurant and smile. What began as a moment of pressure had become a turning point, leading her to reclaim her music, touch the lives of many, and find a deeper sense of purpose. The piano, the performances, and the connection with the audience had taught her that life's most unexpected challenges could reveal hidden strengths, create lasting memories, and open doors to new opportunities. The applause, the awe, and the shared experience would remain in her heart forever, a testament to the power of courage, passion, and the willingness to embrace the unknown.